All right, kids, it's time to begin drawing the tree. As you may recall, this is the end goal that we're going for, something along these lines anyway. And it's called finaltreegraphic.ai, found in the illustrious 10 Pathfinder folder. But we're going to start with this inauspicious file right here. It's called treetemplate.ai, also found inside that same 10 Pathfinder folder. It contains this ugly photograph that we are going to trace together in order to create our beautiful final illustration here. We're going to build things up, for starters, using the line tool, just because it's a very simple tool to use. And by gum, if you can create something this cool using the line tool, then you can do anything inside of Illustrator. Which is true, by the way, you can. Anyway, I'm going to switch back to this graphic. I've got a few layers set up for you here. You'll notice that there's a layer called tree, which is the tracing template. And then we've got some base objects. It's turned off. We'll come back to those later. We've got some tree lines that I'll have you turn on in just a moment, but I want to show you how I created those in the first place. So I've given you a blank drawing layer, which is turned on and ready to go. Make sure it's selected. Then go ahead and grab your line segment tool, which you can get by pressing the backslash key, of course. And I want you to draw each and every segment of this tree independently. So for example, you trace a trunk like so. Just go ahead and draw a line through the trunk. I know that line doesn't look like it's particularly representative of the trunk, but we'll solve that problem shortly. Then go ahead and draw another limb like so. And remember, as you draw these limbs, we're not going for realism. You know, we're drawing a kind of stick tree after all. However, we are going for a kind of realism in that we're trying to make sure that these lines support the tree. So when you're drawing a tree, what you have to remember is that everything's random, right? The branches are cutting off in random directions, and you don't have to exactly match the photograph if you don't want to, in particular because you can't always see all the limbs in the photograph, and it's hard to make sense of where one limb starts and another lets off. However, here's what I want you to think about when you're drawing the tree, is that it's ultimately a vascular system. So, in other words, things branch off from a central trunk, and then you might go in 3 or 4 different directions, maybe just 2 different directions. These branches in a road, if you will. However, you can't have a limb start in the middle of nowhere like that. It needs to be anchored to an existing limb. I'll go ahead and undo that limb and draw a new one like so. So they've always got to be starting from a limb and branching off in different directions because they are ultimately carrying water to the foliage. And so that's something to bear in mind. So just make sure your tree makes sense and that it works. Now, I'm not going to draw this entire collection of lines in front of you because it's not something that I can narrate effectively. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn off this drawing layer for a moment, the layer I was working on, and I'm going to turn on this layer right there, tree lines. And the tree lines layer contains all the various little lines that I created in advance for you. Every single one of them I drew with that line segment tool. That's it. And notice, by the way, my roots, for example, I went ahead and added some roots. And I'm going to click on the tree lines layer to make it active so I don't have that irritating no draw cursor. Notice my roots don't quite connect to the tree, and I guess I could solve that if I want to. Basically, what I'm counting on is the trunk is going to be thicker, but might as well go ahead and move those roots inward because after all, the roots are carrying the nutrients into the main trunk, and then those nutrients are breaking off into the branches. So it's very important that everything touches. Now, you don't need that many roots, not because they aren't there. After all, underground here, there's an entire upside-down tree. However, you only see the very beginning of that root system. So we just need to draw a few lines in place. Now you've got all the branches you need. It's actually kind of fun drawing the branches, by the way. If you want to go ahead and do it yourself, it's good exercise. But the main trick is going ahead and stroking all of these paths in order to give yourself some line weights to work with in the first place, because we're going to then turn around and convert those line weights to closed paths, something that you can do in Illustrator. So what I've done is I've gone ahead. If you twirl open the tree lines layer, you will see that I've created this network of grouped limbs right here. And let me show you how those work. I'm going to go ahead and turn off all the groups that are called limbs 1 through 6, by the way. And then you'll see that there's this one line right there. It's not even a group. It's called trunk. I've gone ahead and named it trunk, and that is the main trunk, of course. And then we've got 2 sets of roots here. I'll go ahead and turn them off too so that I can show them to you as we turn them back on. Here's roots 1. That's the first group of roots. Those are going to be my thickest roots. And then here's roots 2. And those are going to be a little thinner. And you may say, well, how did you decide this, Deke? Again, trial and error. I spent some time drawing this tree, tried to figure out what was going to work, what didn't work, and ended up coming up with this ultimate sort of hierarchy. And then here's limbs 1. So those first 4 limbs right there are going to be our thickest limbs. Actually, I think I've got a collection of 5 lines going. Yeah, I do. And then there's limbs 2, which are going to be a little thinner. There's limbs 3, which are going to be thinner still. Limbs 4, which are filling out this region, going to be slightly thinner. Notice that I'm not being scrupulously careful that everything's symmetrical. So I might have some thicker branches over on the left-hand side than the right-hand side, that kind of thing. That's very natural inside of a tree. We don't want to overweight one side as compared to another, but we do want some thick branches to go fairly high inside that tree. Then limbs 5 right there, those are going to be slightly thinner. And then the thinnest limbs, which would be those capillaries, if we were thinking in terms of veins, those are contained inside the limb 6 group. All right, so if nothing else, that gives you a sense for how things are put together. I, of course, encourage you to draw your own limbs and then stroke those limbs according to my instructions in the next exercise.